Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Conversing on Africa's Peace, a podcast focused on African Union's Peace and Security Council and key related issues, which is produced as a collaboration between the Australian Embassy in Addis Ababa and Amani Africa Research and Media Services. So my name is Sion, once again joining our listeners. Today I also have with me my colleague Tifsihet Hailu. Tifsihet, say hello to our audience.
Hello Sion, hello everyone.
So thanks for joining us on this episode, Tifsit. So today we're going to be discussing the provisional program of work for the month of April. So as we normally do though, before we go into the details of PSC's program for the month of April, it would also be good to also, look back and reflect on the activities of the Council during the course of previous month of March. So as we all know by now, Namibia was the chair of the PSC in March. Tifsihet, if maybe you can briefly walk us through, some of the standout sessions and activities of the Council during this month. I mean, as we all know, in March, the PSC did conduct the induction program for its newly elected members. This was one of its major engagements for the month. March also, appeared to have been committed to discussions which revolved around the deployment and also the status of operation of, various peacekeeping and peace operation missions. This dynamics was an interesting one, I believe. But just generally, Tifsit, maybe, what do you think our listeners should be aware of in terms of key outcomes of the Council's discussions during the month?
Thank you, Zion. As you rightly said, in March, the Peace and Security Council received a briefing and discussed on different peacekeeping operations, their status of operations, and various developments that happened in the past months. Yeah. The Peace and Security Council commenced the activities of the month on 4 March with a session that presented the opportunity for the Council to receive an updated briefing on the operations of SADC mission in Mozambique, and by considering the situation in Eastern DRC and deployment of the SADC mission in the DRC. Okay. Well, these 2 sessions were considered on 4 March. With regards to the SADC mission in Mozambique, the Peace and Security Council rightly expressed concern over the growing threat posed by terrorism and violent extremism in North Mozambique. With regards to the progresses that took place with the mission, it's recalled that during the 43rd Ordinary Session of SADC, held on 17 August 2023, the summit endorsed the decision of the Organ Trokia Summit of 16 August 2023 to extend SAMIM's mandates by 12 months, making new end dates for 15 July 2024. Besides the extension, the summit instructed the leadership of SAMIM to initiate a step-by-step drawdown starting from 15 December 2023, with a complete withdrawal to be finalized by 15 July 2024. In this regard, instead of endorsing the decision of the 43rd Summit of SADC on the withdrawal, the Peace and Security Council took note of the decisions and requested SADC Secretariat to share experiences and lessons learned with the Peace and Security Council on nature, scope, depths, challenges, and possible recommendations to inform future engagements. Additionally, the Council requested that the AU Commission, in conjunction with Mozambique government, to conduct a study to assess the strides taken by the Mozambique government in bridging the void that will be left by the SADC mission in Mozambique. So in relation to SADC, the SADC mission in Mozambique, this is what happened, or this was the outcome of the
major outcomes,
from the Council's meeting. Similarly, with regards to the situation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and the deployment of the Southern African Development Community Mission in the DRC, the Peace and Security Council expressed deep concern over the resurgence of the March 23 movement, which is normally known as the M23 in the Eastern DRC. And what's most significant from the session was the Council's endorsement of the deployment of the SADC mission in Eastern DRC. In this regard, the Peace and Security Council requested the AU Commission to mobilize support for the Southern African mission in DRC, including from the AU Peace Fund, Crisis Reserve Facility, and to expedite the transfer of the equipment donated to SADC, which is still at the AU Continental Logistics Base in Douala, Cameroon. So these are in relation to the peacekeeping operations.
Yeah.
And in addition to these 2 sessions, there was another session on the African Union Transitional Mission in Somalia.
Yeah.
There was it was an informal consultation. And the Peace and Security Council was informed about the conclusion of the second phase drawdown, plans for the third phase, and continuous talks concerning security provisions post-ATMIS. In this regard, it's also worth mentioning that at the Security Conference in Somalia, which took place in New York on December 12, 2023, Somalia appealed for a fresh, restricted multilateral mission following ATMIS. And the goal of this mission would be to safeguard strategic population zones and essential infrastructure in Mogadishu and federal member states as well. As such, the session provided the Council with detailed information on the proposed mission. However, during the consultation, the PCC members did not reach a definitive agreement on certain issues.
No, yeah, I think that's very interesting. Thank you so much, Tifsit. I think the PSC is also going to have a closed meeting on ATMIS in particular, or AU's engagement post-ATMIS specifically, and what strategic plan should be put into place. This is going to happen actually tomorrow, April 3rd.
Yes.
So yeah, we should see what kind of outcomes might actually come from that meeting. We wait and see. But yeah, it was also interesting to see what kind of decisions have been reached with respect to SAMIM and then also SAMIDRC in particular. We were waiting to see whether the PSC would authorize, access to the Peace Fund and the CRF, like you mentioned. So I think these were the key outcomes or the key areas that listeners and audiences would have been looking forward to. So thanks for briefly walking us through these. The PSC also did have some engagement on thematic issues such as the Panel of the Wise. Also on the WPS session in specific was held at the ministerial level just ahead of starting the induction program in Namibia. So it was actually framed as a high-level seminar of the PSC, and they sort of tried to take stock of what kind of developments or what kind of progress there has been made in the area of women's participation and, their leadership in peace processes in Africa in the course of the 20 years of PSC's operation since 2004. So it was an interesting session, but I would say a key component or a key practice, we keep on trying to emphasize in our insights and also our different podcasts in the past as well, is how the PSC is now replicating the previous practice of, involving and actually inviting women on the ground. So in this case, women who are involved in peace processes and peace building processes in Sudan and DRC were invited and they took part and they participated in this session. So I think it's a very encouraging practice, as it, avails opportunity for women to meaningfully engage and also influence policy and decision-making of the AU, specifically the Peace and Security Council. But then also it also advantaged the PSC in terms of getting direct sort of information from women who are on the ground, not only on the general conflict and crisis situation, but also about their unique experience as women who are engaged in peace processes on the ground. So I think that was an interesting one from my side. But yeah, I think if we say this much about March, it should suffice. So looking ahead, the Gambia, as we know, has stepped in as a stand-in chair of the PSC for the month of April. Tifsit, maybe I want you to first explain to our listeners why we are referring to the Gambia's role as a stand-in chair and not as the usual chairperson of the PSC.
Yeah, that's interesting, Zion. Thank you for mentioning that. According to the rules on rotation of the monthly chairperson of the PSC in alphabetical order, that is stated under Article 8, Sub-Article 6 of the PSC Protocol and Rule 23 of the Peace and Security Council Rules of Procedure. So according to these rules, Nigeria was said to be the chairperson for April.
Okay.
However, due to the absence of ambassadorial representation, the typical alphabetical rotation could not be applied for this month. So as a result of that, the Gambia has stepped in as the standing chairperson, and that's according to the manual on working methods for the council. It's stated under Article 67. So it's also based on previous practice that this procedure was used for this month.
Okay, yeah. That's interesting. Thanks for explaining that. And I think 2020 was one of the instances where a similar situation occurred. So during that year, 5 members of the PSC lacked representation at ambassadorial level. So this eventually really led to absence of a substantive PSC chairperson for the months of August to December 2020. So this was actually an interesting one.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So, okay, now that we've briefly highlighted on the procedural aspect of why a standing chair, we can now guide our listeners through the planned agenda items for April. So, currently there are about 6 substantive sessions, along with a high-level meeting on counter-terrorism in Abuja. So, in addition, the PSC will also be marking the Flag Day on the 3rd of April. There will also be the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the genocide against Tutsi in the Republic of Rwanda. So, Tifsit, you maybe please walk us through some of the planned sessions and activities of the PSC that will be taking place during this month.
Yes, Ihon, as you said, there are 6 sessions. I will just highlight on the country and region-specific sessions that are planned for the month. The Council's activities for the month will commence on 3 April. As this date will mark a flag ceremony where new members of the Peace and Security Council will install their flags in the Peace and Security Council chamber. Additionally, the recently revised initial provisional program of work has included a closed session on the same day, featuring 2 separate agenda items. These items include a discussion between the Peace and Security Council and the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and an analytical briefing on strategic planning for post-African transition mission in Somalia, operations in Somalia. This is a new terming of a session for the PSC, analytical briefing. So we're looking forward what the briefing will hold. In addition to that, I would like to provide few insights on the ATMIS session. As I previously mentioned, the session held on 8 March was dedicated to the briefing on the situation in Somalia for post-ATMIS. The Peace and Security Council members, however, did not reach a definitive agreement on certain issues. Furthermore, both the informal session on 27 March and the session proposed for this month are based on the UN Security Council Resolution 2710. And this resolution called for the federal government of Somalia and the African Union to conduct a joint technical assessment by 31 March 2024 to evaluate the phase 2 drawdown and provide an update by 30 April on their preparations for the phase 3 drawdown. So the upcoming session is expected to continue this discussion with the aim of reaching consensus on the unresolved issues. Further to that, the PSC is set to hold 2 sessions focusing on specific regions. One of the sessions is dedicated to the briefing on the situation in the Lake Chad Basin Region, particularly the operation of the multinational joint task force. To provide a context for our listeners, the last session of the Peace and Security Council that considered the topic happened on 13 January, and the session decided to renew the multinational joint task force's mandate for 1 year period. That started being effective from 1 February 2024. Apart from following up on previous requests, what we expect from the upcoming session is that the session will also present the opportunity to the Peace and Security Council to assess the implementation of the regional strategy for the stabilization, recovery, and resilience of the Boko Haram affected areas of the Lake Chad Basin region and address climate change impacts in the region. So the other region-specific topic that the PCC will discuss in April will explore security situation in the Gulf of Guinea, aiming to combat maritime insecurity and piracy in the region. Well, it's to go back and see what happened with regards to the sessions of the Peace and Security Council with regards to this issue. And in a recent session, the Council acknowledged the 10 years implementation of the Yaoundé Code of Conduct and proposed its expansion to the entire Atlantic coast. So it's expected that the Council will evaluate and receive updates to the code's strategies and provisions if there are any changes or revisions that happened in the last year and in the beginning of this year. It may also include an update on progress towards operationalization of the Yaoundé architecture's structure and an assessment of its readiness to tackle emerging threats.
Okay.
Those are the country and region specific sessions of the Council planned for April.
Yeah, thanks again, Tafsir. I think these are also very interesting ones, specifically the one on ATMIS. I think, as we also said earlier, something to keep an eye on. But yeah, maybe since you've walked us through the country and region specific sessions, let me just try and guide our listeners through some of the thematic sessions that are scheduled for the month. So on the 4th of April, we're expecting the PSC to host its annual engagement on hate crimes and the fight against genocide ideology in Africa. So this is essentially poised, to sort of underscore the significance of drawing lessons from large-scale atrocities in conflict situations. I mean, we can see, for instance, the very current one that we're seeing in Sudan. So the idea is to sort of draw out lessons, like I said, and see how these lessons and insights can be implemented as part of AU norms and also the peace and security architecture. So in addition to that, the session is also expected, to provide a platform for following up on some of the key previous decisions of the PSC. For instance, we can recall that the PSC has been calling for the appointment of a special envoy for the prevention of genocide in Africa. So aside from that, the session is also going to serve as an opportunity for commemorating the 30th anniversary of the genocide against Tutsi in the Republic of Rwanda, something I mentioned earlier on. So the other thematic session that the PSC will be convening during this month will be taking place on the 8th of April. And this would be a briefing session to prepare for the upcoming high-level African counter-terrorism meeting, which is scheduled to take place in Abuja from the 22nd to the 23rd of April 2024. So essentially, this session is anticipated to sort of provide details and insights to the PSC members about what this Abuja meeting's strategic objectives are, what the agenda looks like, and also what key stakeholders or who key stakeholders will be participating during the meeting. In addition to that, the briefing could potentially, sort of enumerate ways that could improve the regional cooperation for combating the escalating threat of terrorism. And as a result, it could really influence the discussions and also the kind of outcome that could be expected from the high-level meeting taking place in Abuja, Nigeria. So having said that, it might also be relevant to mention here that the PSC will be conducting a field visit to Abuja from 22nd to the 25th of April. So this is really a field visit taking place within the context of counter-terrorism and also consultations between the AU Peace and Security Council and the ECOWAS Mediation and Security Council. So it's for the first time that the PSC is conducting this sort of mission. So it's interesting to see what the outcomes from this consultation would also be like. So the last thematic session that the PSC will be considering during this month will be dedicated to Continental Early Warning System. So this will be taking place on the 16th of April. So there is a specific theme that this Continental Early Warning System briefing will be taking and it will be held in context of. So this will be on unblocking the obstacles to the effective Continental Early Warning System. So this session is being convened within the framework of PSC's decision in July 2021, where, it called for quarterly updates on Africa's emerging security threats. So as usual, CISA, ACSRT, and AFRIPOL are expected to brief the Council. The focus, as usual, and also having regard to the kind of threats that we're seeing in the continent, could be expected to focus on the persistent and not just persistent, but also increasing trends in terrorism, perhaps also a little bit of a focus to the Sahel region, having regard specifically to PSC's 1170 session communique, where it highlighted the need to have a little bit of a focus on the rapid growth of or spread of terrorism in the Sahel region. So, these are all the thematic sessions that the PSC will be engaging on. Tifsit, maybe if there's anything else from your side that you would like to add and share with our listeners.
Sure, Tihan, thank you. From my side, I'd like to mention a possible amendment that could happen to the provisional program of work of the Peace and Security Council. Mm-hmm. Well, in addition to the sessions that we highlighted on, we anticipate the inclusion of a session on the situation in Sudan. Just to give a little background on this possible session that will be held in April. It's recalled that during the Peace and Security Council session in November 2023, the Peace and Security Council decided to form a high-level ad hoc panel on Sudan, and this decision was made during the 1185 session of the Peace and Security Council. The panel's purpose is to collaborate with all Sudanese stakeholders to facilitate a civilian-led political transition. In line with the decision of the Peace and Security Council, on 3 February 2024, the chairperson of the EU Commission announced the panel's formation. In his announcement, he also communicated that Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chabas will be leading the high-level panel. He is also the high-level representative on silencing the guns for the chairperson of the EU Commission. So far, the panel has conducted consultation tours in locations such as Port Sudan and Cairo, and has also engaged with various stakeholders. So what we expect from the upcoming session is that the PCC will receive an updated briefing from the panel on its consultations and plans for executing the AU roadmap for the resolution of the crisis in Sudan. So I just wanted to give a heads up for our listeners.
In anticipation of a possible session
on Sudan. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Sid. Yeah, that's an important one. So I guess that really brings us to a wrap-up of episode 18 of our podcast. So we will end with wishing Gambia a very fruitful month as it takes the chairship for April. We also, as always, wish everyone taking part in the work of the PSC very productive discussions on these important topics that we have briefly outlined today. So we are happy to also encourage our listeners to dig a little bit deeper into the PSC's agenda, as well as the analytical work that we produce regularly. Amani Africa is also very appreciative of the partnership and support of the Australian Embassy in the production of our insights on the provisional program of work of the PSC each month. And we also do believe that this podcast, as always, is a very useful accompaniment. So before we go, as always, we would like to also wish the following African states happy National Days of Celebration in April. So we have the Republic of Senegal on the 4th of April, Republic of Zimbabwe on the 18th of April, Republic of Sierra Leone and Republic of Togo, both on the 27th of April. So let me also thank our listeners again for joining us for this month's edition of Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast, a collaboration between Amani Africa and the Australian Embassy in Addis Ababa. We hope you have a great month, and we'll be back next month to consider the PSC's agenda for May 2024. Until then, goodbye, and we wish you all peace and prosperity.